So I've been using the PlayStation Portal for a while now, and I'm finally ready to share my thoughts on this honestly very weird device. So if you're unaware of what this is a handheld from Sony, but it's not like a typical handheld in the sense that it doesn't actually play anything locally. The PS Portal is a streaming device which acts essentially just like a wireless remote for your PlayStation, kind of like the Wii U gamepad did back in the day. Meaning to actually use this device the way that it was intended, you need to already own one or purchase a PS5 alongside it. And we'll get to the cost and whether that's actually worth it in a minute here. Now, there's a lot to unpack with this thing, and full transparency, when the PS Portal actually launched, I pretty much swept this thing under the rug and completely forgot about it because I thought it was going to be terrible. To be honest, I didn't really understand the point. Like, you can remote play from your phone and do essentially the same thing, and I've always considered a handheld device to be something that I could actually take anywhere with me, but, and we will get to that really soon here, the Portal is very limited in its use case. Now, before we go further though, a like and a sub to the channel is always appreciated. I just want to say thank you so much for the support that you've been showing me here. We're almost at 70,000 subscribers, which is just insane. I genuinely can't believe that one day there might be a plaque on that wall behind me. So thank you so much for the support. It means the absolute world. So the Portal cost $199, and for that you're getting a pretty solid 8-inch 1080p display, which is a touchscreen. It has a built-in microphone, and it's essentially a DualSense Edge controller for the PS5, but chopped in half on either side. Considering there's an internal battery, a controller, and a screen, I really don't think that the hardware itself is expensive. I mean, in the hand, it feels really nice, and at only 540 grams, it's also considerably lighter than a lot of other PC gaming handhelds, and it weighs just about as much as the Nintendo Switch 2. But this doesn't include the $450 entry price to the PS5, any games that you'd want to play, or a PlayStation Plus subscription, which, by the way, the Portal does now let you stream from the PS Plus premium catalog without the need for a PlayStation 5, except that'll cost you $190 a year. So if you bought the Portal exclusively to stream from the PS Plus catalog, you're looking at a minimum of $389 off the bat, which is a little ridiculous for a streaming device. And if you want to stream from the console, whether you own one or not, you're going to be looking at $650 on the low end, without considering a standard PlayStation Plus subscription to take your games online. Now, while I do think the $200 is actually a really fair price for the Portal, it's a $200 paperweight unless you do any one of those things that I just mentioned, which is kind of ridiculous. However, let's kind of dive in a little more with what you actually get, and I'll talk about how the experience has been owning one, and how I find myself actually using this device, and I'll tell you whether or not I think it's worth it for you. So the actual handheld itself is quite stacked. There's a volume up and down for the pretty decent built-in front-firing speakers. It has a USB-C port behind the bridge that sort of connects the controllers, which is a good spot because it keeps the connection protected from any bumps or bends. It has a 4,370 milliamp hour battery, which can get you up to 8 hours depending on your brightness settings and whether you're using all of the haptic features from the DualSense controller, because yes, this thing actually does have like the haptic triggers and that crazy vibration motor inside of these DualSense controllers. And aside from the display itself, which is self-explanatory, and the button layout that you'd find on the regular DualSense, there's a 3.5mm headphone jack, which unfortunately is the only way to listen to this device privately unless you shell out for Sony's wireless headphones. I don't really recommend that you go that route. You cannot use Bluetooth headphones on this thing, so paying a minimum of $150 just to get a wireless audio experience on a streaming device, it just takes the price of this thing up to a whole other level, and I don't think at that point it's really worth it unless you have a hole burning in your wallet. Now, I will drop links to everything that I've mentioned in this video as well as the accessories that I use with it, but let's finally talk about how gaming on the PlayStation Portal actually is. I do need to kind of just set the stage a little bit to help you further gauge how I'm getting the results that I'm getting. So I do want to be clear, I haven't tried the PS Plus premium catalog. It's way too expensive here in Canada, and the games that I play I do already own, so my experience with the Portal has only been connected to the console. Now, I'm using a PS5 Pro, which shouldn't make any difference other than the fact that it does support Wi-Fi 7, and I am connected to a 6 GHz Wi-Fi network. But if you want the best experience, using an Ethernet cable with your PS5 is definitely the way to go, regardless of whether you have the Pro or not. Ethernet is just not an option for me though. The upload speed from your PlayStation to your router is very important though. I have a 2.5 gig network at home, which is 2.5 gig up and down, but don't worry, that is actually overkill for the Portal. As long as you have a network that is reliable, that is going to get you, I would say, at least 100 up and 100 down, you should be fine and have a good experience. But the most important thing is trying to use an Ethernet cable on your PlayStation so that you can get rid of one of the barriers that comes with wireless. The PS Portal also does not have Wi-Fi 7, so it can only pull from a 2.5 gigahertz network or a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi channel. Now, in my case, I'm using a 5 gigahertz connection on the Portal, but depending on where your router is located or how thick your walls are, this is actually something that you might want to play around with. In my case, here in the office, I might consider using a 2.5 gigahertz network since I am further away from my router and there's a bunch of walls. Okay, now that that spiel is over, when you turn on the Portal, you're prompted if you want to connect it to your PlayStation 5. And for the most part, that works flawlessly. I have had one or two instances where no matter what I did, it just wouldn't connect, so I've had to actually restart my PlayStation. It is kind of annoying because if I was away in like a hotel in a different country, for example, I wouldn't just have access to being able to unplug and replug in the PlayStation just to be able to get that working, which would render for me this device useless. But for the most part, this whole thing has actually been flawless. Now, I've only really been playing a handful of titles. The Battlefield 6 beta was this last weekend, and I would spend a lot of time playing that on the Portal. And I've also started playing Spider-Man 2 on the PS5 exclusively on the Portal since I've been able to play it in bed. Now, from what I've been playing, I do have a couple of takeaways. The actual experience is about as solid as I feel like it really could be. Going into this, I had a lot of almost hate for the Portal. Like, I didn't really see how people would enjoy actually using this thing, so I set my expectations very low, and I was wrong. I mean, there is some artifacting, the text isn't insanely crisp, and there is a slight amount of input delay, but I haven't had any dropouts, I haven't had any buffering or anything weird that's taken me out of what I was playing, and to be honest, the input delay is noticeable, but I think what made it more daunting was the switch from my OLED TV to the actual Portal itself playing natively on the PS5 versus streaming it. I think a lot of this comes from the fact that I'm just so used to OLEDs with pretty much zero input latency, and this is like moving from a really nice TV to a bad LCD panel from 2009, at least in terms of how it feels for the latency. But before buying this, I pretty much had come to the conclusion that this wouldn't be useful at all for first-person shooters. After reading Reddit and seeing what some of the complaints were online, and even after watching videos, I wasn't really sold that this would work for me. But I'm actually quite surprised at how well this thing actually works when I am at home. Sometimes things can look muddy, movement isn't insanely clear, and like I mentioned here, there is some of that input latency, but I can't believe how easy it was for me to actually get past this, especially because I could have just put this thing down and grabbed the Switch 2 or the Ally X. What does help is the fact that this thing is very comfortable, and it's just like you're using a DualSense controller, which is actually really nice. It doesn't feel fatiguing like the Switch does since I'm really used to this, and it fits nicely in like adult-sized hands. I also like that it has full-sized analog sticks so that I'm actually able to play shooter games comfortably without feeling like I'm really kind of losing out on the controls. And it's also nice to have when I'm playing like in bed, for example, considering there's no fans, there's no real hardware in here to heat up, and it doesn't become a nuisance for my wife when we are in bed like some PC handhelds do and even gaming laptops. Now, going into this, I was very familiar with the use case and limitations that this thing would bring me. But I think almost having like incredibly low expectations has made me like this thing a whole lot more than I really thought I would. Like, knowing that this wouldn't be my first pick to take on vacation means that I don't feel like I'm missing out. For me, this is better suited as a home device or for bed if you share a TV, which is perfect for me. The thing is though, with the Portal, you actually can use it out of the house. The only problem is it's just really dependent on the Wi-Fi network that you find yourself in. And in the case of like a lot of hotels or even mobile data, it really isn't going to be as reliable as it probably should be. With poorer network, there's more input latency, there's more artifacting, and playing games like first-person shooters, I've really only found to be possible on my home network. Like I said, that's fine for me, that's what I expected. This is not something that I really thought or want to take around with me, but it's nice to know that I could. Like, if I find myself at my in-laws for the weekend or something, and I want to just, catch up on some of the PlayStation games that I've been playing. This could be a very viable option, and that's something that I'll definitely have to test for myself. But I don't think the Portal is a device that should be purchased with the intention to take it everywhere you go. I think you'd be honestly pretty disappointed if this was your only handheld. And I guess that kind of just ultimately comes down to what the value is in this device. Because for that $650, including the PS5, you could buy yourself a Nintendo Switch 2, a couple of games, and call it a day, and have a really nice device to bring with you. If you own a PS5 though, that $200 might sound appealing if you have good internet, and you want something to sort of move around the house with you or be in the backyard with, and if you share a TV. And if you're interested in the Portal, I would highly recommend checking out something like Facebook Marketplace. That's actually where I found this one, and I got it for an absolute steal. These things are incredibly cheap on the secondary markets because I'm assuming a lot of people buy them and are disappointed by the experience they have with them because they either don't know how to set them up properly or they just expected more out of it. And it's definitely something that you could scoop up for like half the cost. This was listed for 120 Canadian dollars, and this thing goes for about 270 here in Canada. So it was under half the price, and I think for that, it's an incredible value. So is this thing worth it? I mean, without using one, I would have said no, but after living with it for a while, now that I've actually used it and choosing it over a lot of other devices when I do have time to sit down and play something, I think that it's actually worth considering. Like I said, as long as you temper those expectations from it and kind of just align with what I've mentioned in this video, I think you'd have a good experience with it. So anyways, let me know if you want to see some more handheld content. I really appreciate you watching this video. A like and a sub to the channel goes a really long way. And if you've watched all the way through, dropping a turtle emoji shows me who the real ones are. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.